Today I'm joined by acclaimed saxophonist and composer Stephen Banks, a groundbreaking artist working to place the saxophone at the center of the classical music world. Through performance and original composition, Stephen creates music that explores the human experience and diverse voices in concert music. Critics have called him one of the potentially transformational musicians of the 21st century. This is All the Way Authentic, and I'm Kevin P. Henry, and here's my conversation with classical saxophonist Stephen Banks.
So tell us, when did you first get, I don't know, infatuated, drawn to music? When did you think this is something I want to do?
Well, knowing that it was something I wanted to do in my career, for me actually happened pretty late compared to a lot of people. So it was like my sophomore, junior year of high school. And I was already playing before that. I started playing saxophone in middle school, and started playing piano before that. But it was more so just like a thing that I wanted to do, and like, to be around friends and band and I have three older sisters, and they all did something with the piano, so I was just kind of doing that, and I wanted to be like them, you know. Um, but yeah, my sophomore year of high school, my first classical saxophone teacher came to my high school and played for us. We were in jazz band, and he just played for us as like a demonstration. And I was totally enamored by the sound of the classical saxophone, and eventually went to study with him in my junior year, and definitely never looked back after that.
So when I think of the saxophone, and it's probably my third favorite instrument. I mean, I think
Mhm.
of piano being my first because I,
Okay.
I feel like there's so much you can do. You can compose, but then there's synthesizers and there's harpsichords and there's organ.
Right.
There's such a variety of sounds you can get out of a keyboard. And then I think of guitar, of course. I love a good guitar player, whether it be
Uh-huh.
jazz, R&B, or just rock and roll. And then the sax. I mean, some of my favorite musicians, and our sax players. I have a particular affection for the tenor,
Mm.
just because it kind of has that old, funky, really funky R&B kind of sound that I grew up on, Tower Power, Stax Volt, that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. But so so walk me through this. So okay, so now you're doing classical saxophone. So then what happens? I mean, what's the next chapter of that story?
Yeah, well, so in high school, I was sort of getting introduced to it, and then I went to college to study classical saxophone. I was still doing some jazz at this point, actually. So I minored in jazz studies in my undergrad at Indiana University. And once I got to undergrad, I, started playing with my quartet that I'm still in now. It's called the Canary Quartet, and we did a lot of competitions and started actually getting gigs, outside of school. And I did some solo competitions, but actually for a while, my main performance outlet was with my quartet. Um, and after undergrad, I went to Northwestern for grad school, and that's when I started composing there. So it's sort of just naturally adding more elements as I got older. And really, I think when I added composition to my life is when it felt like everything started to fit together. Like I was being a part of creating the music and performing other people's music, and eventually also teaching. And that's kind of where I live now, is in the midst of all of those different things.
So with composing, how does that happen? I mean, what's your process? Do you kind of lock yourself in a room and say with your saxophone and say, okay, I'm not coming out of here until I compose a song, or is it more of a spontaneous thing, where you're driving in the car or you think of something? And is
Mhm.
it because you're talking about instrumental compositions, right? So where does that input come from? Is it nature? Is it, a train wreck on the highway that inspires you to say, I'm going to sit down and compose something now?
Yeah. Well, to all the examples you gave, it's basically a yes and, it can be anything. And it's funny you mentioned instrumental music because I actually just on Sunday and Monday, a couple days ago, I premiered my first piece that includes voice. So it's my first time writing for the voice. So yeah, it's changed a lot for me in terms of where the inspiration is coming from, and it changes from piece to piece as well. Because I think in the classical world, a lot of times people study composition formally and they take lessons, and I never did any of that. And so for me, in the classical space, I sort of think of myself as in the same vein as like a singer-songwriter, and that they're writing about their feelings and like it's a take on the world, but I often don't use words. It's just if I were to imagine a feeling that's happening or that train wreck on the side of the road, like what music would ensue that would create a similar, internal vibe that would go with that. And that's often a starting place. And um, with instrumental music, it really also depends on the strengths and weaknesses of every instrument. So when you write for the saxophone, which also I never have the saxophone with me when I'm writing. I always write at a piano because I never want, if I write at the saxophone, it will limit what I do because I'm thinking like, ooh, that feels good to play, or this feels right, and so I'm not thinking like in a more holistic way. So I always write at the piano. But when you're writing for a cello, for example, there are certain things that a cello just naturally does really well and naturally expresses, versus an oboe, expresses it has a totally different sound world to it. Um, and so sometimes I have all the instruments that I have to write for, and then I try to think, if I think about the strengths of all of these instruments, like what kinds of things are even available to me as a composer. And then sometimes I start with an idea and I say, I need these instruments to create what I'm trying to think of. And so my most recent piece, I actually started with the instrumentation. I didn't have a full idea of what I wanted, but I imagined like an ideal sound world and sort of cherry picked all these instruments. So it ended up being violin, viola, cello, bass, piano, flute, soprano saxophone, and this mezzo soprano vocalist. Because I wanted the lushness of the strings and the sort of harmonic bass of the basis, I guess, of the piano, and then to have the flute and soprano saxophone in the same range, but being able to have slightly different timbres, and then a singer just being able to float on top of all of that stuff. So it changes all the time, but that's kind of the most recent thing and how that came together.
Well, I really appreciate you breaking it down. So, of course, you've made me think of like five other questions now
Okay.
that I wasn't even planning on. And one thing comes to mind is you did such a great job at describing, I guess, the shadings, the colors that come out of
Mm,
certain instruments and the feel and that kind of thing. So, if you were to take that song you just mentioned and you said, okay, I'm going to change the instruments. So I'm
mm,
going to have an acoustic guitar and a harmonica
hmm
and a flute or something. Would it then sound and feel different? Would it be a different kind of vibe, I guess?
Would be totally different. And that's cool too. Like sometimes people take things that I write and try to arrange it in a different configuration.
Mm.
And I think that that's cool, but in a way, it's a totally different thing, even though they're playing the same notes.
Hmm.
It's like every instrument to me sort of has almost like a soul, of that's how you kind of notice when You listen when you meet people who play certain instruments. A lot of times they have a certain disposition to them, and oftentimes it has something to do with the instrument and something to do with the kind of music that they play. You don't very often meet really, really shy singers, because they're so used to bearing their soul to especially just in my field, I meet a lot of opera singers, and they always have huge personalities because their instrument requires them to be huge.
Right.
Um, so yeah, when you change the instrument, if you gave the vocal part to a French horn,
Mhm.
it's such a different thing. Yeah.
That's such a great analysis. And so, two more questions. So, given what you've just said, have you or do you intend to write for film, for instance? Because I'm thinking,
Mm,
I have a movie, here's a scene, and I give it to you, and then you're supposed to, expand on whatever that theme or that concept is in the scene and put it into music.
right. I would do it. I'm open to it. I've never done it before. One thing, I have some composer friends who have written for film and really didn't like it.
Mm.
Actually, because you're not the end of the chain at that point. Like so I once heard actually John Williams, he was talking about I think someone asked him what his biggest regret in life was, or something like that. And he said, not sharing all of the music that got cut from all of these films that I've written for. So I can only imagine, we think of like Star Wars or Jaws or all these things, like what else was there? Like I want to hear that stuff, but it ultimately is up to the director and the other people what really makes it in. So, but I think it would be a fun process to do that.
Yeah, it's something that I think can expand you as an artist, but like a
Hmm.
lot of forms, you're not in control of it. So
Right.
I've talked to a lot of actors who I said,
Mm.
"Hey, you were in, this movie," and they go, "Yeah, well, I was there for 5 days, and they edited everything down to about,
Yeah.
this 2.5 minute scene or something, and there's like another half hour worth of acting of my art that's out there that nobody will ever see, kind of thing."
Right.
So, oh, next question would be saxophone. So you play, well, you tell me what you play, all the different saxophones.
Yeah. So mostly I play soprano through baritone, soprano, alto, tenor, and baritone saxophones. But I've also played some of the more obscure ones, the bass saxophone, which, by the way, was invented first. Bass saxophone was the first saxophone, and then they went up from there. Um, and the sopranino saxophone is smaller than the soprano. But my main instruments are the soprano through the baritone.
So explain the difference between, say, baritone, tenor, and alto in
Okay,
terms of, I guess, the notes and the tone and that kind of thing.
yeah. Well, the main difference is that they have slightly different ranges, so the tenor can play a bit higher than the baritone. And this is in general, because actually you can play pretty high on a baritone. You could play up into the soprano range on a baritone, but it's going to sound like you're really squealing up there. Whereas on the soprano, it would feel natural in sounding. But yeah, the baritone is the lowest, and then you get a little higher with the tenor, a little higher with the alto. They are also pitched in different keys. So when you play a middle C on baritone, that's a different pitch than middle C on the tenor. So baritone is in E flat. So a C, when you play it on the baritone saxophone, is actually an E flat if you were playing it on the piano. So they're transposed differently. Um, and in a more sort of nuanced way, I think that each saxophone, just like I was talking about the different instruments, I think each saxophone has its own character too. So like a baritone saxophone to me, can have a whole you can give the vibe of like a double bass, um, or you can sort of have a feeling of a cello or maybe like a baritone singer. But you can also do percussive stuff on the baritone saxophone, whereas on the alto, you're going to have a whole different set of possibilities in your wheelhouse
Mhm.
there. So each instrument has slightly different characters, but in general, if you're just playing it, the fingerings for all of the saxophones are pretty much the same. So if you play one, you can play the others. Of course, you just have to get used to the intricacies and stuff.
So was that easy to go from one to the other?
Um, in a certain sense, yes. If you're really good, no. Like if it's really good, it's really easy to just do it and be like, look, I can play all of them. But to be a professional and like have to play in tune, and to have to have a really characteristic, beautiful sound on all of them, it's it takes a lot. And one thing that's very like in the weeds is like to play the saxophone, you spend a lot of time working on reeds. Reeds are actually what create the sound. They're the thing that's vibrating back and forth and that you're actually hearing. And so I always say, basically, if someone says that you sound good, what they mean is you have a good reed. And so if you have to play baritone and then you have to play alto, you might have a really good baritone reed. Your alto reed might suck, and then you sound really bad on alto.
Okay, I did
So
not know that.
yeah, so you can go back and forth really easily, but once you get to the point of like, oh, there's certain things I actually need out of these instruments, then it gets hard again.
Got it.
Yeah,
Well, it reminded me of there's a song, very popular song by Billy Joel called Just the Way You Are. You probably heard it. And
yeah.
there's an alto sax on there. It's which kind of really, I mean, the song's a really good song anyway, but it really, I think, pushes it up another notch. But I
Mm,
remember reading a story of the producer, Phil Ramone, who's passed away since then. He called in a guy named Phil Woods, I believe it was,
oh yeah.
yeah, and he brought him in specifically because I guess they had the song, and Billy Joel already had a sax player named Richie Canada,
Mm,
I think, and he plays tenor though, and
hmm.
so I guess maybe Richie expected, well, I'm going to be playing the sax. And no, 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 we're going to it because Phil in his mind said this an alto, the warmth of an. He kind of went into detail about the sound, the difference between the alto and the tenor, and that the alto really fit that particular song.
Hmm.
And so, and it's one of the highlights of the song. People still, talk about that. Now, is it hard or challenging or not to play in a group versus by yourself? Say, because I love a good horn section. I'm a big
Hmm.
power fan, Chicago, I mean, Memphis horns, all that. Is that easy if I were to say, okay, we got a session and you're one of three saxophones, we got two trumpets and two trombones. Do you just slide right into that without a problem?
Well, yeah, I think it's more, how would I say? Um, it's just a different skill set, and so like anything, it's fun to dabble in different things, and you have to play a little bit differently. And I love particularly playing in groups now because I do so much as a soloist that when I get to play in a group, it's like, yes, I finally don't. It's because it's nice sometimes to not be the feature, to be able to like relax and just kind of be a part of what's happening. Um, but you also like when you learn to play as a soloist, you have to then use a different skill set to like chill out a little bit, to not play too loud all the time, to like fit into the sound. Um, and so, in a sense, it's easier. I think psychologically, it's easier to play in a group
Okay.
than to be a soloist sometimes. But in terms of the actual like skill of it, they both bring their own challenges and and things that are nice to do as
Okay.
well.
Well, what about stylistically? And he's been dead for a while, but I'm imagining, okay, so your background and your training and is in classical, so is it easy to adapt to a style? So, for instance, if James Brown were still alive and he said, okay, Stephen, I need you to be one of the horns, and that's funk, that's
Yeah.
old school funk. Is that easy? Do you just kind of get into a funk state of mind and then pick up
Yeah.
tenor?
Well, I think for me personally, I could do it, because I actually like in undergrad, I was in this group called the Soul Review, and all we played was like James Brown, Sly and the Family Stone, Nina Simone, like all that kind of stuff. And we did choreography, like there were horn movements and stuff like that. So I could do it, but for most classical saxophonists, that would be really hard. And just because it's like a separate training. I just happened to do that, and also growing up in church, and like it's you just hear, how it sounds, and it's a part of who I am. Um, but like, I have a lot of students that I work with that they would need to like really practice and get used to the sound world, and also on the saxophone, we use completely different equipment in that genre. So you can't, I mean, you can, but it won't sound right. If you use a classical mouthpiece or reed, you'll sound like do 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 do, and you need the sound to be like fat. You need it to be right there, and so you might use like a metal mouthpiece that can produce a little bit more bite in the sound. So yeah, I could do it pretty easily, but it's not necessarily an innate thing to just being a musician, I guess, to be
Okay.
able to switch genres easily.
Okay, it's interesting because when I used to a long time ago, but I used to interview a lot of recording artists. I'm a big fan of the blues, gospel,
Yeah.
R&B, of course. I mean, some rock and roll, but there were some. Well, they used to call them blue-eyed soul singers,
Mm,
and the Joe Cockers or I mean, there's a whole bunch of them, Boss Skaggs, any number of people. I said, where did these people grow up?
mm,
And what were they listening to? And because you made the comment about it's part of who I am. And I think when I talk to producers, they get really, some of the real successful ones get very specific about, there's a whole bunch of guitar players in town or there's a whole bunch of trumpet players, but they want this one person because they have that sound. I remember listening to a interview with Steely Dan,
mm,
Donald Fagen, Walter Becker, and there's this album called Asia, which was a big album. And they would get all the top players, all the top LA, and sometimes New York players. And so there's this song called Peg, which has a guitar solo, I think that the guitar solo they used was by Jay Graydon.
mm.
And it was like the 10th guitar player they had brought in,
Wow.
and they finally got it. Whatever the sound, whatever he had was what they wanted. But some of the people that they passed on were all the top guys. It was Larry
Mm,
Carlton or something, and Rick Derringer, and all these people that you think would come in and they're going to do it in one take, but they were so specific. And I talked to some background singers. One in particular, Vanetta Fields, who was on several of their songs. And she said, hey, they would run us through like 90 vocal takes of something. And she says, 89 of them I would have taken. Which leads
yeah.
me, which leads me to my question. What is more fun or challenging, fulfilling, live or recording?
Very easily live. Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, I have a whole diatribe. So,
All right, well, you can give me the
uh,
short version.
yeah, yeah. I just think that for me, live music is music, and recording to me is it's like a representation of music, but it's not the actual thing. And so, like I think of music as a collective thing. Like when there's an audience there, they're participating by being there, or singing along or whatever it is that they're doing. And those moments can't be recreated. Like you can look at it sort of like you look at a photograph of the Grand Canyon. It's not the Grand Canyon, So I live 100%.
Okay, is it tedious as well? Is it like, oh man, we got to do this again? And then plus added on is what your philosophy or your feeling is about it in the first place. As opposed to live.
Yeah,
I mean, I think of video. I've done videos, or TV shows, they chop everything up. You're doing the ending first, and then you're talking to a green screen, and it's all like this huge puzzle that's put together eventually. Whereas you're on
yeah.
stage, live theater, you're there in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, actually, in some ways, recording is easier because you can keep doing it. Like if you mess it up, you can just do it again. So there's like a slightly lower pressure that just lasts longer, because you just if you got to do it until you get it. Whereas in a performance, that moment, it's gone, and you go on to the next thing. And so it, in some ways, actually, recording I find to be easier.
Okay, all right. Because I've been in some recording sessions over the years, and at first, before I went to my first one, it was a pretty significant one. It's like a Lionel Richie
Oh,
back in
wow.
the '80s, and it was like I said, "Oh, this is exciting." And after 2 hours, I said, "I got to get out of here. This is like, they were like working on one part of a song for like two
Yeah,
hours." And I said, it sounded fine to me the first time I heard it. What are they working on? But I
yeah,
know what you're talking about it not, it being not an illusion, but it's like you said, it's not real in the sense that it's not happening in real time. Is that I've known musicians who played on albums together and didn't even know who they were playing with. I said,
right.
I
Yeah,
said, "Oh, you played with so and so, this drummer," and I said, "He said, I did. I have no idea." I just put the headphones on, the rhythm track was there, and I went about my business. They said, "Fine, it's good," and then they went on to the next session. So travel,
yeah,
a lot of traveling. So is that fun? And what's not fun about it? Maybe hotel food or something.
yeah. Um, I don't love traveling, just in general. Um, I I think in general, I'm someone who likes to be at home, just as a base thing. It would be nice to be able to have people that I just go and hang out with every Tuesday, you know. And sometimes those things are harder to like try to maintain when you're gone every Tuesday, Um, and it's well, one thing that's specific to the saxophone that's difficult is the reed thing I was talking about earlier. It's like every place that you go, the climate and the is a little bit different, and humidity is different, altitudes are different, and all those things actually affect the reeds that you're using to play. So that means every time you go somewhere, you got to deal with a whole new reed situation. Um, and altitude, like when you play at high altitudes, there's literally less oxygen in the air. And so one time I almost fell off the stage because I was seeing stars, because we didn't rehearse at the same altitude as the performance. And I just had to stop because I couldn't,
Wow,
I
and
couldn't
that's
keep playing.
the oxygen is not as much, or the air is thinner as well.
Yeah, yeah. So like that's why like marathon runners will often go and train at higher altitudes so that when they come down, it feels easy. Um, so that's something that maybe people wouldn't always think about. Um, but yeah, of course, the hotel thing's not super fun, but to me, it's also like on the flip side, it's like if I want to play at a high level, and the reason why the travel is so worth it is because wherever you're going, you're getting to be with your people, the people who value the same stuff that you do and also want to do it at a high level. And you can't just find that anywhere. So that definitely makes it worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, I had heard a story about some vocalists being affected by the high altitude. And in fact, I
Yeah.
remember there was Phoebe Snow, rest in peace. She was a singer, really big in the 70s and the 80s, but I drove up to her concert in LA one time. And they had to cancel a concert, and she says illness, and I found out later that she had been in Colorado, and this is what she
Mm,
thought. She had been in Colorado and that she had like ruptured a vocal cord or something.
wow.
And the doctor said, if you go out and sing, if you don't stop singing for like a month or whatever it was, you will probably totally lose your voice because
Wow.
whatever's going to happen is going to get way worse. And, she said, well, that's my voice is, you know.
That's
So
it. Yeah.
yeah, but she had, and I've heard that before with performers losing oxygen and and that kind of thing. So which leads me to my next question, self-care. In order to
Hmm.
be a proficient, effective musician, you feel good about going out there. Is there like certain requirements, like what you eat, what you don't eat, how much sleep you get, even like just the air quality? Because if you're like, I would think is you're using your lungs and everything, that if you're in a third stage smog alert trying to play, that's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, well, that's not a good idea for sure. Um, I think there are certain things that are like more ideal. Recently, I've started trying to exercise a lot more and be more conscientious with eating and all that stuff, and I actually feel much better in general. Um, and but also, I think one thing that has helped me a lot as with touring is to have preferences. It's like of like, okay, I want these things to happen on the day of a performance or something, but also to be cool if they don't, because I think honestly the mental aspect of the whole thing is way more important than the specifics of what you're doing. Like I used to get really frustrated if I asked for like a certain kind of microphone, because that's how I feel like I'll sound my best. And then I would only feel good if I had that kind of microphone, but if it isn't going to work, then it's more important that I can just roll with it and, do what I need to do and not get too hung up on stuff. So I've found that having, yes, having preferences and thoughts of like, oh, I want to eat this, an hour before, like, okay, but if it's not there, I'm still gonna do it, and it'll be
Okay,
fine, you
but
know.
you're not going to go out and go to one of those all you can eat places,
Right.
and put on about 5,000 calories and then go on stage. It might kind of
No.
affect you a little bit, right?
Yeah, I in general, I don't really eat like maybe 4 or 5 hours before I play. Because I'm using my lungs so much and the diaphragm is going down, and you don't want to be like full of stuff. Um, so yeah, on a performance day, I usually have a really nice big breakfast
Hmm.
and maybe like sometimes I'll do like a banana or something like that because it helps with nerves and all of that, like in the afternoon, and then eat after the concert.
Well, let me ask you about that nerves. So I've heard a lot of performers say they still get nervous. They could be, 40 years into the business, but they channel that
Hmm.
into, and in fact, sometimes they've said as long as it doesn't get to be too many nerves, it actually helps sometimes because it just gives them a sense of, I don't know, urgency or a little edge or whatever. So how about you? Do you still get a little bit nervous standing in the wings?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I just think of it as like if I wasn't nervous, then there'd be something wrong. It's like to me the nerves are just like, oh, you actually care how it goes. You want to do what you have a vision of something that you want to be able to do. So um, I guess it's channeling it, but it's also kind of like just being like, oh, this is normal.
Okay.
This is natural. Because it's for me at least, the nerves are not. Um, I hope people. It's not really other focused. It's more like I really know what I want to put out there, and I hope I can do that, you know,
Okay.
um, tonight. And so I like that. I like having those nerves.
I'd like to thank my guest, classical saxophonist Stephen Banks, for being on All the Way Authentic. For more information about Stephen, go to Stephen, Steven -Banks.com. This is All the Way Authentic. I'm your host, Kevin P. Henry.